and I'm talking to Penny Pepper, who's going to reveal some of her wisdom about being a disabled woman and relating to people and sexuality and many other things as well, I'm sure, en route. So Penny, over to you.
Hello everyone. Hello Richard. So yeah, I'm Penny Pepper and I am a writer, poet and speaker these days. I've had a long journey around issues with sexual identity, because when I was a younger woman, we didn't really have that to explore. We weren't allowed that identity. We had the usual, where we're not sexual in any shape or form, or we are overly sexual in some instances, and that was reflected a lot in the media, where it was never a positive experience. This really affected my interest in being a writer, because there was nothing, you know, by us, for us, to use the great mantra. So I did start writing stories quite young that were little, probably quite disgustingly romantic if I looked back now. And then everything changed for me, and I say it so often, but it's so true, when I became aware of punk. Punk's often dismissed as like a phase of fashion, but it wasn't. It was a groundbreaking, seismic change in how we saw ourselves, particularly working class people, and for women, because it was one of the first movements within music and culture that allowed women a space to be who they wanted to be. They weren't managed, they weren't manufactured. They could make statements as themselves. They didn't have to be pretty, or so it's a perfect space to explore who you are really as a disabled woman. And that led me to do poems that were much more in the vein of John Cooper Clarke, who's a big influence on me, and just to be angry. So you could be an angry punk poet, you could say anything you wanted, so you could be as out there and explicit about sexuality. And I do know that when you think of you know, the disability arts movement, that a lot of us came through that, where we realized we could use poetry to show anger, including, or, you know, we could be sarcastic, we could use words, we could reclaim words, you know, right back to Alan Sutherland and beyond really. But I would say Alan Sutherland had an effect on me, because he was doing the classic DIY thing with photocopy your poems and staple them together and sell them for 20p to your mates. At least that's what I did, but I know Alan was, you know, it was a great thing to see way back. Now I have had quite a full and extraordinary life, and when I was asked or considered to do my memoir, which you can see behind me, I don't know if you can read it on this screen, but it's the red book, first in the world somewhere. There was always a worry that you'd become your memoir in a way, and it would be used by the mainstream to just make you an inspiration. I was fortunate to work with some great women, actually, who made me realise that it wasn't about me being a default inspiration, it was my story. Oops, sorry there, Richard. It was my story and what I'd got up to. And that can be anyone's point of inspiration. So I always say I'm not inspirational just as a disabled person who happened to get out of bed, but hopefully I'm inspirational, and I don't mind that. I've become more comfortable with that because of the mad, crazy work that I've done, the extraordinary life that I lived, which in some ways is embedded in my identity as a disabled woman, but in other ways is more than that. And I think that's important. So I did, you know, I found a way to move to London from the sticks. I found a way to form a band. I found a way to do a fanzine and get my work out there. And that was quite unusual for a lot of women anyway. And if I was talking to a younger version of myself or an equivalent of that person today, it's ironic because I feel that in some ways we have come a long way, but I also think that particularly over the last 10 years, we've gone back a little. I won't get too political, but I'm sure we can all work out why, what with austerity measures and, you know, the blaming of disabled people for so much. I also think, though, that we've found our angry space, and that's good. When I was young, it didn't really exist. You were still stuck in that idea. You had to be grateful, and you had to be literally the receiver of charity, services, goodwill. Whereas now I think that's shifted, and that's good. But in that mix somewhere is how you can just be a human being, how you can have the right to a sexual identity, however you wish that, and wherever that takes you. As we go through these challenges around what that means and what's the difference, you know, gender and biology. I think these are very healthy things as well to be going through, because for women we've spent like practically the whole of civilization wondering what we are without the influence of the patriarchy. So we're going through that, and with that we can now look to see, you know, where we might belong as disabled women. It does make me laugh sometimes though, because a lot of things I see going on, you think, God, you can take that for granted now because so many of us made a fuss, from the likes of people in, you know, DAN, Direct Action Network, to those of us screaming about it through, in my, you know, mostly in my case, words. I noticed lately, Richard, that there's disabled people queuing for the accessible spot on the bus now.
Yeah.
That's got to be a success, a sign of success in some ways, that it's taken for granted. But I hope that we don't develop a sort of passivity. I worry about that. I don't feel like there's a whole wave of activists. But I'm going off the point a bit, so I'll come back to sexuality.
Do you think that modern disabled activists tend to express themselves more on social media than actually out in reality? A little,
but I do think that can water it down. It's not, because I never did a great deal of direct action in the sort of 90s. I was never well enough. I was always in and out of hospital and God knows what. But I don't necessarily think that is the only way, but it's almost about where you are with it in your own thoughts, that you realise you have a space to be angry. And you have a right to be angry. But just putting that on Facebook won't particularly make any difference whatsoever. And I miss the sort of little pockets we had of collaboration and working together, because I think that is important.
So
and there are people doing it. There definitely are, but they're not. They might be the next generation down from me, but behind them, there's not many. So I don't know many. They are there, but I don't know as many people in there. Maybe it's because I'm getting old. Who knows? But that are consciously organising themselves, who are in their 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
So, but in terms of sexuality, we have like the extremes. I mean, I do a lot on social media. I have to for my work. I don't mind it. But places like Instagram, there's a huge amount of disabled people on Instagram celebrating who they are, their right to a sexual identity. They model, they do, body acceptance stuff, and they are, I say they're the warriors of today. They challenge hatred, which pours at you like you cannot imagine. Thankfully, it's always counterbalanced, but it really exposes the divisions. But I think we also, what you called an influencer, you get that on all social media. So if you've become an influencer in that area of sexual identity and sexual expression and sexual rights, you will be attacked, but you will also have a huge amount of support. And I believe that is a positive thing. I would say the younger people that are doing that are genuinely on a brave path for the whole, again, they're not intrinsically brave, but they're making brave decisions in reminding themselves and others that you have that right. But there's also a big a kind of disconnection between those people and, if you like, the mainstream, as there always is. What do we get in the mainstream? We get something like the Undateables, which I got asked to be a consultant on that in the early days, and I said no. And they asked me what I thought of the title, and it was like, and I know a few people that were asked. I hate the title. I wouldn't hate it so much if it was just generally about people who found it hard to date, and it included disabled people, perhaps, not simply about disabled people. And I don't know how that, because in some ways, does it make younger people think, well, the only hope they've got is to sign up to an expensive agency, which is what they use. Or are things improving? Obviously, I'm Liz Carr's #1 fan. She's a very good friend, but where she was given a husband who she could kiss in Silent Witness when she played Clarissa Mullery. I think that is a game changer, because it's just, in quotes, normalized. There's a few, I know we've got a few actors who've done great stuff, and some are still there in different dramas and soaps, and I believe that is a good thing. If I'd seen that, it would have made a difference to how I felt as a young woman. But I must just remind everyone of this. Is it back to front on the screen? I don't know how.
No, we can see that, Penny.
Yeah.
What's the title?
It's Desires.
Desires, right. Is this your latest?
No, this is my oldest.
Your oldest, right?
This come out in 2007. No, 2003. 2003. There's not many of these left now, actually. I own the stock. There is an ebook version, which was reissued in 2012 to tie in with the Paralympics, which is available at all good suppliers, ebook suppliers in all formats. It is a short story collection of explicit fiction around the lives of disabled people. It's all about disabled people. I won an award with the Arts Council in about 2000, which at that point the award was run by Sian Williams, and there was about 10 of us. It was quite again, it was quite a significant moment, because people like Catherine Araniello won something. Once I moved to London, which was in 85, things changed. I was still very much in the punk ethic. And I did have my first serious boyfriend, who in the memoir is Freddie. And he was my manager, because I was trying to put a band together. And obviously the experience of realizing someone wanted to be with you and in essence desired you, was, in some ways it was a difficult journey for me, because I'd been taught that I wouldn't be, and that I needed to accept that. That was the status quo really then. So there was, emotionally, I had to move on with that. And then I realized what a lie it was. And then you start realizing, actually, oh yeah, my best friend of 3 years ago, she had a boyfriend, didn't she? And you picked up these things. So I also was, I was writing a lot. I wrote a lot about, if you like, desire and relationships in the broader context in my music. I realized it was so underexplored, and I was a member of the Outsiders Club briefly around that time, and me and my flatmate and my dear friend Tamsin, we did the first Outsiders magazines, and we learned from Outsiders, and I won't knock it, because it had a place where, and I find it really funny, because so many people I know who've been activists have nearly always had a connection, or they were members of Outsiders very briefly. And all I will say is that you can't really stay in that. I'm not going to say much more, but let's just say, after you've explored what it offers, it's quite limited for you to grow within it, just because of what it's set up for and how it operates.
And just to be clear, Outsiders was an organisation that was set up for the disabled people to find sexual partners, really, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, well, to find partners, to find, it's really like a socialising club.
Right.
And if that happened, that was great. And some great, people have been involved in it, and that was one reason I did my bit. But me and my friend Tamsin were there way back in the mid-80s, when it had really just started, and we were quite naive about it in a way. We did go to quite a few events, and that was educational, and we, on and off, I won an erotic Oscar via the Outsiders Club. I won't describe it, but it's an interesting, I haven't got it now. I don't know where it went. I've moved so much since then. But I still feel there's a place for it, but there's an issue around how it runs. And people like Matt Fraser have been involved, Mick Scarlett, a lovely woman called Leslie Childs. I don't know if you knew Leslie, but
I did know
she
that.
was an absolute beautiful human being. And you know, I actually rejoined Outsiders because Leslie was a member. The only reason really, to try and, you know, change, well, just to offer what you had to it. So I think, sorry, what were you going to say?
I just think, I mean, obviously, if people come together who've been deprived of sex, but felt that they haven't the right to have it, and suddenly there is something, even though you're the outsiders, is it going to be more dominated by the prevailing sexist attitudes and mores rather than a more feminized approach to sex? Do you think that was one of the problems with it?
Yeah, I do. I think that also for me, it became very much about just sex. And this was what set me on the path to write about sex more, was you know, I would be seen as very liberal and relaxed, but I was very, very inexperienced. I just read a lot. You know, I'd read all the feminist tracts, and I'd read everything. I'd read women's erotica, Anais Nin. There's a book called Fear of Flying. So I was sucking these up, absorbing them in detail. So I was very educated, but lacking in experience. But I did know I would be like plonked in at a table, and people would say, "Oh, go and talk to Penny because she's very, you know, she's very laid back and blah blah." And it was funny because, again, until these times in my life, I was incredibly shy. Incredibly, I now I know now, you know, I've got an anxiety disorder, and I'm not hiding that. I'm not. It's just people don't realize I couldn't speak to people in ridiculous situations. So to suddenly be placed in this was quite a challenge. But I did realize quickly that what most people, men, women, non-binary, was relationship, which included sex. So sometimes, you know, people would say, I want to go, I just want to I want to find somewhere that's accessible, I can go on a date. And let's just start with that, which I think is still true today. You might be sort of, you know, beside yourself with passion for someone, but you still want to like do the steps, go through it, do the date, do the getting to know each other bit. I mean, there's a whole, I won't sort of pick up on it now, but internet has changed a lot of that, because you can go on to all kinds of sites, even the blooming Tinder, and technically have as much casual sex as you want. Might not be very good, might lead to not even just horrific abusive scenarios, but I don't think it's technically very good for you, for your psychologically. It's not good for you unless you're ready for that. But I think now what's changed, there's awareness of these things. One thing I cannot abide, and I believe Mick Scarlett's with me on this, is the idea of a sexual service. it's been used, for disabled people, it's been used for all sorts of reasons to legitimise sex work and brothels and even sex robots, because I talked about that on BBC Ouch, like this excuse that but leaving aside the arguments about sex work, but you know what we feel about that, what the implications and morals and realities of that are, please don't just select disabled people as a, you know, a peg to hang your arguments on. I've had that throughout. One thing let me just backtrack slightly though, because from outsiders, because I was like doing all that, and then I got asked to Kate Nash, we were quite radical at Young Arthritis Care, because we very much operated you know, by disabled people for disabled people, and that was young people with arthritis. But Kate was fantastic, and she still is. She was our director, and through her we decided to write a sexuality guide. It's one of the proudest, you know, I'm so proud of it, Richard, that we did it by doing surveys. I was brought in to organise it. We asked the questions. We were very early social model proponents of that approach. And then when I wrote the guide, the first chapters are about social model, understanding that if you view these things from the perspective of barriers, it will take you a lot further. And then we went, it was quite funny because we went into, we had a chapter on positions and people talking anonymously about how they managed that. And we had lots of discussions about the drawings, because we didn't want them to be like what we would joke about, the joy of sex, where you've got non-disabled people in amazing positions that would just simply put you off. So we made sure that they didn't look perfect. They were like stick drawings in the end. Anyway, it was really successful, and I think they still do an imprint of it to this day, and that was about 94, 96. We were the first organisation to do it, and then people copied it, and I'm very proud of that, Richard, very proud. And I was like married by then to Freddie, and had done a lot more talking about it and writing. And then from that I got picked up by the sort of late 90s, I think, by Tom Shakespeare to write for his book. What's it called? I think that's called Untold Desires.
Yes.
The Sexual Politics of Disability. And that was a very exciting thing to be involved with. And I do write in that about being involved with outsiders, because they got a bit grumpy with me, but anyway. And I wrote one of the chapters for Tom. And it kind of just from that, you see, then I got asked to do little bits and pieces for feminist magazines, and fictionalizing my own experiences, those of others, and that became Desires. And I'm proud of Desires as well. It's a bit of a long story about the logistics of how the Arts Council worked, but they've improved too. So
let's skip forward to where you are now, really.
Right, where I am now is I mean, these topics are still close to my heart, because although things have evolved and changed, like I say about the undateables and so on, I do get asked about the sexuality stuff a lot, and I don't think there's many women disabled women who have kind of taken it over for me, and sometimes I wish there were. It'd be nice to see, you know, a 25-year-old taking that role now, and there probably are on the influencers on social media, but I think it's very different. I think in some ways sexuality has been democratized, but also it's been it's just a commodity more than ever. And I think that doesn't help disabled people. I'm working on a poetry collection to follow up. You can see my other one there in the background, the yellow one. Very proud of it. That's called Come Home Alive, and it's actually me with my head on the body of the Botticelli Venus in a steampunk wheelchair, because onward we go with that. The publishers told me that Facebook banned it as a direct image. They had to get around it because it's got a Botticelli nipple.
Unbelievable.
I know. I mean, and okay, it's fun.
They put it's the association that they can't cope with, rather than nude. They put loads of Botticellis up on the net everywhere. So
yeah, so I think but we got around it because they can't keep track of anything. If I do a little video of it, it doesn't pick it up. But I'm now working on a lot of projects. My novel is out there. Send me lots of vibes. I've got an agent, and my novel, which I'm not allowed to say the title, has been out with publishers for just under a year, I think. And we're hopeful. It takes so long in publishing. There's lots of other bits and pieces going on. I write monthly. I'd love to write, actually, maybe next year when I can find a thing in the news to hang it on. I write monthly for Byline Times. And which, for anyone who wants to know, is it's kind of like a new independent newspaper. Comes out once a month in print, and also online. You get more of it on print, but I say it's like an advert, please subscribe, but they pay me, and they do news that's not connected to any of the other it's not a Murdoch, it's not BBC or Sky or anything. So I love it.
So we've sort of been going half an hour, so we need to sort of summarize really where we are. So if I can ask you a question. So what I've picked up from you talking, and then you can just build on that, is that through all your experimentation, you've decided that the most important thing is the relationship rather than just the commodified sex, if you like, and that the sex and relationships must go together. Let me say now, since 2020, autumn 2020, all children and young people have to, particularly secondary, have to have sex and relationships education. It's mandatory. And all children in primary schools have to have relationships education, and these need to include talking to disabled young people. And do you think that would have made a difference to you when you were growing up, that sort of education?
Well, if it was good, I remember having sex education, but it was atrocious. It was my generation. It was looking at rabbits, and I think it would actually. I think knowing you're included would help, and I think really, because this is the other thing, it's not that I've had casual sex, and I'm sure many disabled people will be having casual sex, and it's not that I'm against that, but it is the commodifying of it, and understanding you need to be quite comfortable in your own skin to successfully do that, I think, to get pleasure out of that. I also think that, you know, issues around body acceptance, self-love, masturbation are still quite new for women. So for disabled women, I get asked and interviewed by so many companies selling sex toys. And I would say even now, very few are accessible for disabled women to even comfortably be able to understand their own body.